This is Austin Crowley broadcasting on 97.3 FM from what's left of downtown Richmond, Virginia. It's 11:47 p.m. on what I believe is Tuesday, January 14th, 2025. The temperature outside has dropped to 22 degrees, and there's no heat in this building. Haven't had power from the grid for 6 days now. I'm running on a car battery I pulled from a Honda in the parking garage, wired to some equipment I found in the station's emergency kit. Don't know how much longer this will last. For those just tuning in, or those who've lost track like I have, it's been 3 weeks since what the government was calling isolated incidents of civil unrest turned into something nobody wants to name. 3 weeks since the shooting in Charlottesville that killed 17 people at a town hall meeting. 3 weeks since the National Guard opened fire on protesters in Atlanta. 3 weeks since the internet went dark in 12 states. If this signal's reaching you, drop the first word you hear me say. Prove you're tuned in. I've been a radio host in this city for 8 years. I've covered hurricanes, I've covered protests, I've covered elections. I thought I understood what crisis looked like. I was wrong. What's happening now isn't a crisis you cover and move on from. It's the end of something we all took for granted. It's the moment when the country splits apart and both sides start shooting. The last official news broadcast I heard was 5 days ago. Channel 8's evening anchor, Sarah Martinez, was reading from a teleprompter about federal forces working to restore order when the feed cut to static. Haven't heard from any major networks since. The cellular towers went down the same day. Radio is all we have left, and most stations have gone silent. I'm staying on air because someone needs to document what's happening. Someone needs to tell the truth about how fast everything fell apart. It started with the election, but it wasn't really about the election. The vote count in November dragged on for weeks. Lawsuits, recounts, states refusing to certify results. By December, we had 2 people claiming to be president. By January, we had 2 governments. The one in Washington that controlled the military, and the one in Austin that controlled the National Guard units in 7 states. Both sides said they were the legitimate government. Both sides said the other was staging a coup. I remember the exact moment I knew we were past the point of no return. January 2nd, 2025, 3:17 in the afternoon. I was driving home from the station when I saw helicopters flying low over the James River. Military helicopters, but I couldn't tell whose military. They were heading toward the state capitol. 20 minutes later, the governor of Virginia was on every emergency channel announcing that federal agents had attempted to arrest him in his office. He said he'd escaped, that Virginia would not recognize federal authority, that the state would defend itself against what he called an illegal occupation. That night, the 1st Battalion of the Virginia National Guard surrounded the federal courthouse downtown. By morning, there were tanks on Broad Street. Not a lot of tanks, maybe 6 or 7, but tanks nonetheless. In Richmond, Virginia, in America. I stood on the roof of this building and watched soldiers pointing guns at other soldiers across a downtown intersection. That's when I knew we weren't having a constitutional crisis anymore. We were having a war. The thing about civil wars is they don't start with grand declarations and battle lines. They start with confusion. They start with people not knowing who's in charge, who's legitimate, who they're supposed to obey. They start with neighbors picking sides based on fear and rumors and whatever makes sense at the moment. They start with normal people doing things they never thought they'd do, because suddenly, normal doesn't exist anymore. The first real shooting happened on January 7th. Federal marshals tried to serve warrants on the Virginia National Guard commander. The guard unit at the courthouse refused to let them through. Someone fired first. Nobody knows who. but within 5 minutes there were bodies on the pavement, and both sides were calling for backup. That night, the governor declared martial law and closed the state borders. The next morning, federal forces surrounded Richmond. I've been documenting what I can see from here. This building is 12 stories, gives me a decent view of the city center. The federal troops set up checkpoints on all the major roads leading out of the city. The state forces control downtown and the Capitol complex. Between them is maybe 6 blocks of empty streets that nobody controls. That's where the shooting happens. That's where people get killed, trying to cross from one side to the other. The weird thing is how quiet most of the city has become. Outside the government district, life almost looks normal. People go to work, stores are open, kids play in the parks. But everybody knows something fundamental has changed. You can see it in how people move. Nobody makes eye contact. Conversations happen in whispers. Everyone's watching everyone else, trying to figure out which side they're on, whether they can be trusted. The grocery stores started running out of food on January 10th. Not because there's no food, but because the supply trucks can't get through the checkpoints. Both sides search every vehicle, and the drivers got tired of being treated like smugglers. Gas stations closed the same day when the delivery tankers stopped coming. The banks shut down when the federal government froze Virginia's accounts, and the state government threatened to seize any bank that cooperated with federal authorities. I've been talking to people on the phone, back when phones still worked, trying to understand how this happened so fast. Dr. Maria Santos, a political science professor at VCU, told me something I can't get out of my head. She said democracies don't die from external invasion or military coups. They die when citizens stop believing in the same basic facts, when they stop trusting the same institutions, when they stop seeing each other as legitimate participants in the same system. She said we'd been heading toward this for years, maybe decades, and the election was just the spark that lit a fire that was already built. The scariest part is how organized both sides have become. This isn't chaos. This isn't random violence. Both sides have command structures, communication networks, supply lines. Both sides are recruiting civilians, organizing militias, preparing for what they say is the defense of democracy. I've seen teenagers wearing federal armbands checking IDs at gas stations. I've seen suburban moms in camouflage manning roadblocks for the state forces. Normal people have turned into soldiers in 3 weeks. Yesterday, I watched a firefight from my window. Federal forces tried to advance down Monument Avenue toward the Capitol. State troops were dug in behind barricades made from overturned cars and concrete barriers. The shooting lasted maybe 20 minutes. When it stopped, there were 4 bodies in the street. 4 Americans killed by other Americans on a street I've driven down 1,000 times. The bodies are still there. Nobody's sure whose job it is to collect them. The governor's been on the radio every day, talking about defending Virginia's sovereignty against federal tyranny. The federal commander's been broadcasting his own messages, talking about restoring constitutional order and arresting traitors. Both sound absolutely convinced they're saving the country. Both sound terrified that the other side is going to win. I keep thinking about my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She's 73, lived in Richmond her whole life. 3 days ago, she asked me which side I thought was right. I told her I didn't know, that I was just trying to report what I could see. She nodded and said, I lived through desegregation. I lived through Vietnam. I lived through 9/11. I never thought I'd live through America tearing itself apart. Then she started crying. I've never seen Mrs. Patterson cry about anything. The radio in the next room is picking up transmissions from both military units. The federal forces use encrypted communication mostly, but sometimes they switch to open channels. The state forces seem to be using whatever equipment they can find. I've heard National Guard officers coordinating with local police, amateur radio operators relaying messages between units, even taxi dispatchers being used to move information around the city. Both sides are improvising, making it up as they go along. What scares me most is how normal this is starting to feel. 3 weeks ago, the idea of soldiers fighting soldiers in American streets would have seemed impossible. Now, I check their positions every morning like I used to check the weather. I've learned to recognize different types of gunfire. I know which neighborhoods are controlled by which side. I know which routes are safe and which ones get you shot. This has become my normal, and that terrifies me more than anything else that's happened. The power's been cutting in and out for days. The water pressure dropped to almost nothing yesterday morning. The city services are breaking down because nobody knows who they're supposed to answer to. The police department split 3 ways. Some officers joined the federal forces. Some joined the state forces. Some just went home and locked their doors. The fire department is still trying to respond to calls, but they have to negotiate passage through checkpoints controlled by people who might shoot them. I need to tell you about what happened at the hospital. Richmond General is trying to stay neutral, treating wounded from both sides. But yesterday morning, a federal patrol brought in 3 wounded soldiers and demanded that the hospital turn over any state forces being treated there. The hospital administrator refused, said they were treating patients, not prisoners. The federal officer said anyone fighting against legitimate federal authority was a terrorist and had no right to medical treatment. Then, a state unit arrived and said anyone collaborating with the illegal federal occupation was a traitor. The hospital is now under guard by both sides. Federal troops at the north entrance, state troops at the south entrance, and medical staff trying to save lives in the middle. Dr. James Wilson, the emergency room director, called me this morning to say, they're running out of blood, running out of antibiotics, running out of everything because neither side will let supply trucks through. He said they've had to choose which wounded soldiers to treat based on how much medicine they have left. This is Austin Crowley on 97.3 FM, broadcasting from Richmond, Virginia, day 21 of what I guess we're not allowed to call the Second Civil War. The battery indicator on this equipment is showing about 60% power remaining. I'll keep broadcasting as long as I can, documenting what I see, trying to be a voice for the people caught in the middle of this nightmare. If you're listening, if you're safe, if you're somewhere this madness hasn't reached yet, learn from what's happening here. Learn how fast everything you took for granted can disappear. Learn how quickly neighbors can become enemies, how quickly soldiers can become targets, how quickly America can stop being America. The sun will rise in about 6 hours. Maybe tomorrow will bring some kind of resolution. Maybe someone will find a way to stop the shooting and start the talking. But right now, looking out at a city divided against itself, watching Americans kill Americans in streets I've walked my whole adult life, I'm not sure what's left to talk about. Both sides think they're saving democracy. Both sides think the other side is destroying it. And somewhere in between those two certainties, the country I grew up believing in is bleeding to death. This is Austin Crowley, still on 97.3 FM. It's now 12:23 a.m., January 15th. The battery's holding steady at about 55%. I've been getting some feedback through the emergency channels, people trying to reach me with information, asking questions. I wish I could take calls, but the phone system's been down for days. All I can do is listen and try to piece together what's happening beyond what I can see from this window. I need to tell you about the refugees. That's what they're calling people who are trying to get out of the contested areas, though nobody wants to use that word because refugees are supposed to be people fleeing other countries, not fleeing their own neighborhoods. But that's what they are. Americans who've become refugees in America. The federal checkpoints are letting people through if they can prove they're not Virginia residents, or if they have family in federal-controlled territory. The state checkpoints are stopping anyone they think might be federal agents or sympathizers. In between, there are thousands of people who just want to get somewhere safe, and both sides treat them like potential enemies. I watched a family with 3 kids get turned back at the federal checkpoint on Broad Street yesterday because the father's Virginia driver's license made them suspect he was a state militiaman. The mother was crying, holding a baby, asking where they were supposed to go. The soldier at the checkpoint just shrugged and pointed back toward downtown. The Red Cross tried to set up a refugee processing center at the old convention center, but both sides shut it down. The federal forces said it was providing aid to enemy combatants. The state forces said it was a federal intelligence operation. So now people are camping in churches, in school gymnasiums, wherever they can find space. Richmond Baptist Church has about 200 people sleeping in the sanctuary. Most of them are from the neighborhoods near the fighting, families who lost their homes to artillery fire or just got scared enough to run. Pastor Williams called me 2 days ago when the phones were still working intermittently. He said he's trying to stay neutral, trying to just help people, but both sides keep pressuring him to take a stand. Federal officers came by asking him to report any suspicious activity among the refugees. State militia members came by asking him to hide weapons for them. He said he's spent his whole ministry trying to bring people together, and now everything he's worked for is falling apart. People from the same congregation won't sit next to each other anymore because they support different sides. The economic situation is getting desperate. Most businesses have closed because they can't get supplies, or because their employees can't get through the checkpoints. The ones that are still open are running out of everything. I walked down to Miller's grocery yesterday during a brief ceasefire. The shelves were maybe 20% stocked. Milk was $8 a gallon. Bread was $12 a loaf. Mrs. Miller told me she's not price gouging. That's just what it costs when you have to smuggle supplies through military checkpoints and pay bribes to get them through. She said she's thinking about closing because she can't afford to restock, and she's scared someone's going to rob her. The black market is thriving, though. There are people making fortunes smuggling basic supplies between the federal and state zones. Gasoline goes for $15 a gallon if you know who to ask. Batteries, medicine, baby formula, anything that's hard to get officially can be bought from guys who know which guards to pay off, which routes to use, when to move. Some of them are just opportunists trying to make money off misery. Others are people who lost their regular jobs and are trying to feed their families any way they can. I need to talk about the propaganda war, because that might be more dangerous than the actual shooting. Both sides have set up radio stations, put out newspapers, covered the city with posters. The federal broadcasts talk about restoring law and order, protecting democracy, arresting terrorists and traitors. The state broadcasts talk about defending freedom, resisting tyranny, protecting Virginia from invasion. Both sides make it sound like they're the good guys, and the other side wants to destroy everything Americans hold dear. But here's what's really happening. Both sides are using the same playbook. Both are restricting movement, controlling information, arresting people without trial, using military force against civilians. Both claim they're doing it temporarily, just until the crisis is over, just until the other side stops being unreasonable. Both have set up detention centers for people they consider security threats. Both are recruiting children to inform on their neighbors, their teachers, their parents. I got hold of a flyer that the state forces are distributing in schools. It's titled, "How to Spot Federal Agents and Collaborators." It tells kids to watch for people asking unusual questions, people who seem too interested in military positions, people who criticize the governor or express support for federal authority. It gives a phone number to call to report suspicious activity. There's probably a similar flyer from the federal side, telling kids to watch out for state sympathizers and secessionists. This is how democracies die, not with tanks rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue, but with neighbors spying on neighbors, with children reporting their parents, with everyone so scared of the other side that they'll accept anything their own side does in the name of protection. Both sides are turning Richmond into a police state and calling it freedom. The casualty reports are impossible to verify, but I've been keeping track of what I can confirm. Since the fighting started 3 weeks ago, I've personally witnessed or received credible reports of at least 47 deaths. That includes 23 soldiers from both sides, 16 civilians caught in crossfire or killed at checkpoints, and 8 people who were executed for suspected collaboration or desertion. Those are just the ones I know about in Richmond. The governor claims federal forces have killed over 200 Virginia civilians. The federal commander claims state forces have killed dozens of federal personnel and aided foreign enemies. Truth is the first casualty in any war, but in a civil war, truth gets murdered, and both sides claim the other side did it. I don't know what the real numbers are. I don't know who started the shooting on January 7th. I don't know which side is telling the truth about anything anymore. All I know is that people are dying, families are being destroyed, and a city I love is turning into a battlefield. The most heartbreaking part is the kids. Richmond has about 25,000 school-aged children, and most schools have been closed for 2 weeks. Some because they're in contested areas, some because they've been turned into military bases or refugee centers, some because the teachers and staff are too scared to come to work. The children don't understand what's happening. They know there are soldiers in the streets and loud noises at night, and their parents are scared. But they don't understand why Americans are fighting Americans, why their friends might be enemies now, why the flag means different things to different people. I talked to Jennifer Martinez, a third-grade teacher at Oak Grove Elementary, before the phones went down. She said her students keep asking when things will go back to normal, when they can go back to school, when the soldiers will go away. She doesn't know what to tell them because she doesn't believe things will ever go back to normal. She said she's thinking about taking her own kids and leaving Richmond, leaving Virginia, going somewhere this madness hasn't reached yet. But she's scared that there might not be anywhere left to run. The infrastructure is collapsing faster than anyone expected. The electrical grid is still mostly functional, but rolling blackouts are becoming more common as both sides divert power to their military operations. The water treatment plant is operating at reduced capacity because half the staff stopped showing up to work. The sewage system is backing up in some neighborhoods because maintenance crews can't get through checkpoints. The internet went down citywide on January 12th and hasn't come back. Cell service is sporadic at best. Richmond General Hospital is becoming a symbol of how impossible neutrality has become. They're still trying to treat patients from both sides, but the situation is getting more dangerous every day. Yesterday, a federal patrol accused them of giving preferential treatment to state forces. Today, a state unit accused them of sharing intelligence with federal commanders. The medical staff is caught in the middle, trying to save lives while both sides threaten them with violence if they help the wrong people. Dr. Wilson called me during a brief moment when the phones worked this morning. He sounded exhausted, defeated. He said they've had to post guards at the blood bank because both sides want to seize medical supplies for their own forces. They've had to hide medicines because military units keep trying to requisition them. They've had to lie about which patients they're treating because soldiers from both sides are demanding access to wounded enemies. He said he became a doctor to heal people, not to choose who deserves to live and who deserves to die based on which uniform they wear. The religious community is fracturing along the same lines as everything else. Richmond has always been a deeply religious city, with churches that have existed for over a century, bringing people together across racial and economic lines. But now, congregations are splitting based on political loyalties. Pastor Williams at Richmond Baptist isn't the only one struggling with this. I've heard about fistfights in church parking lots, about families walking out when their pastor prays for the wrong side, about Sunday services where half the congregation refuses to stand for the same flag. Father Rodriguez at St. Mary's Catholic Church tried to hold an interfaith prayer service for peace on Sunday. About 50 people showed up, but they divided themselves by which side they supported. When Father Rodriguez prayed for all the victims of violence, some people walked out because he didn't specifically condemn federal tyranny. When he prayed for reconciliation between Americans, other people left because he didn't specifically condemn state treason. The service ended with more division than it started with. This is what civil war really looks like. It's not just soldiers fighting soldiers. It's the complete breakdown of the social bonds that hold a community together. It's neighbors becoming enemies, institutions choosing sides, children learning to hate people they've never met. It's the moment when shared citizenship stops being enough to keep people from killing each other. I keep thinking about something my grandfather told me. He was in World War II, fought in Europe, saw combat in France and Germany. He said the thing that struck him most about the war wasn't the battles or the death, but how quickly normal people could become capable of terrible things when they were scared enough, when they believed their survival depended on it, when they stopped seeing their enemies as human beings. He said, Americans think they're different, that we could never turn on each other the way people did in Europe. But he said, fear and hatred work the same way everywhere, and Americans aren't special enough to be immune. The battery indicator is showing 48% now. I need to be more careful about conserving power, but I also need to keep broadcasting while I can. This might be the only independent voice left in Richmond, the only source of information that isn't controlled by one side or the other. People need to know what's happening here. The rest of the country needs to understand how quickly everything fell apart, how fast ordinary Americans turned into enemies, how easily democracy can collapse when people stop believing in the same basic principles. This is Austin Crowley on 97.3 FM, broadcasting from a city at war with itself. Day 21 of the crisis that nobody wants to name. The shooting has stopped for now, but I can see both sides reinforcing their positions, bringing up more equipment, preparing for whatever comes next. Tomorrow will bring more violence, more division, more families torn apart by politics that have turned into warfare. If you're listening from somewhere safe, somewhere this madness hasn't reached, hold on to whatever keeps your community together. Because once it starts falling apart, once neighbor turns against neighbor, once shared citizenship stops meaning anything, it might be impossible to put it back together again. This is Austin Crowley on 97.3 FM. It's 1:15 a.m., January 15th. Battery at 44%. I've been trying to pick up signals from other cities, other states, trying to understand how far this has spread. What I'm hearing is making me sick to my stomach. The emergency frequencies are carrying reports from Atlanta, Nashville, Charlotte, Norfolk. Same pattern everywhere. Federal forces trying to assert control, state forces resisting, local governments caught in the middle, civilians paying the price. But it's not just Virginia anymore. North Carolina's governor declared independence from federal authority yesterday. Tennessee's legislature voted to suspend federal law enforcement within state boundaries. South Carolina's National Guard is mobilizing. Georgia's split between the federal-controlled northern counties and state-controlled south. I managed to pick up a transmission from a station calling itself Free Atlanta Radio. The broadcaster said federal forces control Hartsfield Airport and parts of downtown, but state militia has the rest of the city. She said there's fighting in the suburbs, roadblocks on every major highway, families fleeing toward rural areas that haven't picked sides yet. She said the CDC headquarters in Atlanta is under federal protection, but most of the staff evacuated when the shooting started. The Centers for Disease Control, the institution that's supposed to protect American health, abandoned because Americans are shooting Americans. From Nashville, I'm hearing that the Grand Ole Opry was turned into a federal command center, the symbol of American music occupied by soldiers. From Charlotte, reports of Bank of America headquarters being seized by state forces who are trying to prevent federal access to financial records. The economy isn't just collapsing, it's being weaponized by both sides. But here's what's really terrifying. I'm not hearing anything from Washington, nothing from the Pentagon, nothing from the White House, nothing from Congress. Either federal communications are completely locked down, or the federal government has lost control of the situation so completely that they can't even maintain propaganda broadcasts. The silence from the Capitol is more frightening than all the gunfire in Richmond. I did pick up one transmission that claimed to be from Air Force One. The voice said the president was safe, that federal authority would be restored, that the rebellion would be crushed within days. But the signal was weak, scratchy, and it cut out after maybe 30 seconds. I don't know if it was real, or if someone was broadcasting a recording to maintain the illusion that there's still a functioning federal government. The international response is becoming a factor now. I caught fragments of BBC World Service reporting on the American crisis. They're calling it a constitutional breakdown, comparing it to Yugoslavia in the 1990s, speculating about whether the United States will exist as a single country by the end of the year. The Canadian government has closed the border with the United States and is refusing entry to American refugees. Mexico has done the same along the southern border. We've gone from being the world's superpower to being the crisis other countries are trying to avoid. More disturbing are the reports of foreign involvement. There are rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, that Russian advisors are working with some state militias. Chinese intelligence supposedly offered weapons to federal forces in exchange for trade concessions. Iran allegedly promised support to whichever side would withdraw from Middle East military operations. I can't verify any of this, but the fact that these rumors exist shows how far we've fallen. America has become the proxy battlefield for foreign powers who want to see us destroy ourselves. The humanitarian situation in Richmond is deteriorating rapidly. The refugee camp at Richmond Baptist Church was raided by federal forces this morning. They claimed state militia were hiding weapons there, using civilians as human shields. Pastor Williams tried to intervene, tried to explain that these were just families looking for shelter, but the soldiers arrested him for obstruction. They loaded him into a transport truck along with 12 men they identified as possible combatants. Nobody knows where they were taken. The women and children from the church are now scattered across the city, sleeping in abandoned buildings, hiding in basements, begging for food from anyone who will help them. Mrs. Patterson, my 73-year-old neighbor, has been taking in families. She's got 11 people living in her 2-bedroom house now. She told me yesterday that she's spending her entire Social Security check on food for these people, but she can't turn away hungry children. She said this is what Americans are supposed to do for each other, but she doesn't understand why we're creating so many people who need help. The medical crisis is becoming catastrophic. Richmond General is down to less than 20% of normal supplies. They've run out of antibiotics, pain medication, surgical equipment. Dr. Wilson sent a message through one of his nurses asking me to broadcast a plea for medical supplies. He said they've had to perform surgery without anesthesia, treat infections with expired medications, choose which patients live and which ones die based on who has the best chance of survival with minimal treatment. But here's the truly horrifying part. Both military commands have forbidden their personnel from donating blood or medical supplies to the hospital because it might aid enemy forces. Soldiers are bleeding to death from treatable wounds because their commanders won't allow doctors to use supplies that might save enemy lives. The Hippocratic Oath, the most basic principle of medical ethics, has become a casualty of war. I need to tell you about the children who've been weaponized by both sides. The federal forces have established what they call Junior Patriot Brigades in schools they control. Children as young as 10 are being trained to identify threats to federal authority, report suspicious behavior, and assist in security operations. They wear armbands with American flags and carry identification cards that give them authority to question adults. The state forces have their own version called Freedom Scouts. Same concept, different uniform, different flag. Children recruited to spy on their neighbors, their teachers, their own families. Both sides claim they're teaching civic responsibility, protecting democracy, preparing the next generation to defend American values. What they're really doing is turning children into informants and destroying the trust that families and communities depend on. Yesterday, I watched a 12-year-old boy at a federal checkpoint interrogating an elderly woman about why she was carrying prescription medications. The boy had been given a list of drugs that might be used to treat wounded enemy soldiers. The woman was trying to explain that the medicine was for her diabetes, but the boy was insisting she could be arrested for aiding terrorists. A 12-year-old child threatening a grandmother with military detention because he'd been taught that medicine might help the wrong people. The psychological damage this is doing to an entire generation of children is incalculable. They're learning that loyalty to political authority is more important than compassion for other human beings. They're learning that neighbors are potential enemies, that parents can't be trusted if they have the wrong opinions, that violence is an acceptable solution to disagreement. We're not just fighting a civil war. We're raising a generation that will never know what peace looks like. The food situation is becoming desperate across the city. Most grocery stores have been empty for days. The few that remain open are charging prices that most people can't afford. A can of soup costs $15. A bag of rice costs $40. People are starting to raid abandoned houses looking for anything edible. Gardens are being stripped bare by desperate families. Pets are disappearing from neighborhoods. But both sides are hoarding food as a weapon. Federal forces control the main food distribution warehouse and are only allowing supplies to reach areas under their control. State forces have set up their own distribution network, but only for people who can prove their loyalty. There are neighborhoods where children are starving, not because there's no food in Richmond, but because their families live in the wrong zone, or support the wrong government. I watched a bread riot yesterday near Monroe Park. About 200 people had heard rumors that a truck with supplies was coming through a federal checkpoint. They waited for 6 hours in the cold, families with young children, elderly people who could barely stand, desperate for any food they could get. When the truck finally arrived, it was carrying military equipment, not supplies. The crowd turned angry, started throwing rocks, demanding to know why soldiers had food while civilians were starving. The federal troops responded with tear gas and rubber bullets. I watched people running, screaming, trampling each other to get away from the chemical clouds. An 8-year-old girl got separated from her mother in the chaos. She was standing in the middle of the street, crying, surrounded by gas canisters and soldiers, not understanding why the people who were supposed to protect her were hurting everyone around her. The communication blackout is more complete than I initially realized. Not only are phones and internet down, but both sides are jamming radio frequencies to prevent enemy coordination. Most of the emergency services frequencies are blocked. Ham radio operators are being arrested by both sides for unlicensed broadcasting. The few stations still operating are either under military control or, like me, hidden and running on backup power that won't last much longer. This means that families separated by the fighting have no way to contact each other. Parents don't know if their children are safe. Spouses don't know if their partners are alive. The social networks that hold communities together have been completely severed. People are making life and death decisions based on rumors and fear because there's no reliable way to get accurate information. I've been trying to maintain some kind of journalistic objectivity, but I need to be honest about what I'm seeing. This isn't a conflict between equally legitimate political positions anymore. Both sides have abandoned democratic principles in the name of defending democracy. Both sides are using authoritarian tactics while claiming to fight authoritarianism. Both sides are destroying the country they claim to be saving. The federal forces talk about restoring constitutional order, but they've suspended habeas corpus, imposed martial law, and are detaining civilians without trial. The state forces talk about defending freedom, but they've established their own secret police, censored opposition media, and are executing people for collaboration with the enemy. Neither side represents the America I grew up believing in. What's happening in Richmond, what's happening across the South, isn't the defense of democracy. It's the violent death of democracy. It's the moment when political disagreement becomes military conflict, when fellow citizens become enemy combatants, when the Constitution becomes just another casualty of war. The battery indicator is showing 37% now. I'm going to have to start conserving power more carefully if I want to keep broadcasting through the night. But I feel an obligation to document what's happening, to be a witness to the collapse of everything we thought was permanent about America. This is Austin Crowley on 97.3 FM, broadcasting from Richmond, Virginia, on day 21 of the crisis that's tearing America apart. The gunfire has started again. I can see muzzle flashes from the federal positions near the river, return fire from state positions near the Capitol. More Americans killing Americans in the streets of an American city. More families that will wake up tomorrow missing someone they loved. If anyone in authority is listening, if there's anyone left who cares more about the country than about winning, please find a way to stop this. Please remember that we're all Americans, that we all want safety and security and opportunity for our children, that we all believe in freedom and justice, even if we disagree about what those words mean. Please remember that there has to be a better way to resolve our differences than killing each other in the streets. But I'm not sure anyone in authority is listening anymore. I'm not sure there is any authority left that both sides would recognize. I'm not sure America can be put back together after it's been torn apart like this. All I can do is keep broadcasting, keep documenting, keep hoping that someone, somewhere, will find a way to end this nightmare before there's nothing left to save. This is Austin Crowley on 97.3 FM. It's 2:05 a.m., January 15th. Battery at 33%. The shooting stopped about 20 minutes ago, but I can still smell the smoke drifting through the broken window. Something's burning near the Capitol complex. Could be a building, could be vehicles, could be anything. Fire department sirens went silent days ago when they ran out of fuel and couldn't get through the checkpoints to respond to calls. I need to tell you about something that happened today that changed everything for me personally. This morning, during what passes for daylight hours now, I saw my own nephew standing at a state militia checkpoint. Tommy Martinez, my sister's boy, 19 years old, wearing combat fatigues and carrying an assault rifle. He was stopping cars, checking identification, deciding who could pass and who couldn't. 3 weeks ago, he was a college sophomore studying business administration at VCU. Now he's a soldier in a war against his own countrymen. I tried to get his attention from across the street, but he was focused on his duties, focused on following orders from people who've convinced him that half his neighbors are enemies who need to be stopped by force. My sister Maria called me 2 weeks ago, crying, saying Tommy had dropped out of school to join what he called the Virginia Liberation Front. She begged me to talk to him, to make him understand that this wasn't the answer. But the phones went down before I could reach him, and now he's carrying a gun and pointing it at American citizens. The recruiters for both sides are targeting young people specifically. They're setting up in high schools, on college campuses, anywhere they can find kids who are angry and confused and looking for someone to blame for why their world is falling apart. They promise purpose, belonging, the chance to be part of something important. They don't mention that they're recruiting cannon fodder for a war that nobody really wants, but nobody knows how to stop. The propaganda has gotten more sophisticated and more vicious. Both sides have mobile broadcasting units that move through neighborhoods, setting up speakers on street corners, playing messages designed to increase fear and hatred. The federal broadcasts talk about Virginia terrorists who want to destroy American democracy, who are getting weapons from foreign enemies, who will kill anyone who doesn't submit to their radical agenda. The state broadcasts talk about federal stormtroopers who want to turn America into a police state, who are taking orders from globalist conspirators, who will enslave anyone who believes in freedom. Neither side talks about compromise anymore. Neither side suggests that maybe Americans on both sides want the same basic things: safety for their families, economic opportunity, respect for their values, a voice in their government. The rhetoric has moved beyond politics into the language of holy war, where the other side isn't just wrong, but evil, where negotiation is betrayal and violence is righteousness. I've been monitoring both command frequencies when I can pick up their transmissions. The tactical communications reveal something that the public broadcasts don't admit. Both sides are running out of resources faster than they expected. The federal forces are dealing with supply lines that stretch across hostile territory and local populations that range from uncooperative to actively hostile. The state forces are dealing with equipment shortages, ammunition rationing, and the reality that they're fighting the most powerful military in the world with National Guard units and civilian militias. But what's really breaking both sides down is desertion. Soldiers who enlisted to defend America are discovering that they're being ordered to attack Americans. Federal troops are going AWOL rather than fire on civilians in cities they grew up in. State militia members are abandoning their posts when they realize their neighbors and former friends are on the other side. Command structures on both sides are fragmenting as individual units decide they won't follow orders that require them to kill people they used to barbecue with on weekends. The economic collapse is accelerating beyond what anyone anticipated. Richmond's unemployment rate has gone from 6% to over 40% in 3 weeks. Most businesses have closed permanently, not just temporarily. The banking system has completely broken down because federal and state authorities are making conflicting demands on financial institutions. Credit cards don't work. Checks can't be processed. Electronic transfers are impossible. We've gone back to a barter economy almost overnight. People are trading skills and goods directly. A mechanic will fix your car in exchange for food. A teacher will tutor your children in exchange for firewood. A nurse will treat your injuries in exchange for gasoline. The complex economic relationships that made modern life possible have collapsed into the most basic human transactions. Survival has become a full-time job for everyone. The social fabric is unraveling in ways that will take decades to repair, if it can be repaired at all. Churches have split along political lines. Schools have become indoctrination centers for whichever side controls them. Community organizations have disbanded because their members can't be in the same room without screaming at each other. The institutions that brought people together across political differences have either collapsed or been weaponized. I talked to Sandra Johnson, who ran the Richmond Community Center for 15 years, before communications went down completely. She said the center had to close because they couldn't hold any events without them turning into political arguments. The senior citizens lunch program ended because elderly people were getting into fist fights over politics. The youth basketball league ended because parents couldn't trust coaches from the other side with their children. 15 years of building community connections destroyed in 15 days of political warfare. The racial dynamics are particularly heartbreaking. Richmond has always struggled with its history, but there was progress being made, genuine relationships being built across racial lines. Now both sides are trying to weaponize racial grievances for political advantage. The federal forces claim they're protecting minority communities from state racism. The state forces claim they're protecting all Virginians from federal oppression. Meanwhile, minority communities are being devastated by the violence and economic collapse, caught between two sides that claim to represent them, but don't actually listen to what they need. I've been watching the memorial statue controversies take on a new dimension. Federal forces have been removing Confederate monuments as symbols of rebellion against legitimate government. State forces have been defending them as symbols of Virginia heritage and resistance to federal tyranny. But the real tragedy is that while politicians and soldiers fight over bronze statues, real communities are being destroyed by real bullets. The symbolism has become more important than the substance, the gestures more significant than the people they're supposedly helping. The mental health crisis is something nobody's talking about, but everyone's experiencing. The constant stress of living in a war zone, the fear of random violence, the uncertainty about basic survival, the betrayal of seeing neighbors become enemies. It's breaking people psychologically. Dr. Patricia Chen, a psychiatrist who was working at a federal checkpoint before it was overrun, told me she was seeing symptoms of acute stress disorder in almost everyone she encountered. She said people were developing the psychological profiles of refugees, even though they'd never left their hometown. Children are showing the most severe symptoms. They're having nightmares about soldiers, panic attacks when they hear loud noises, refusing to let their parents out of their sight. Teachers who are still trying to hold informal classes in basements and safe houses say children can't concentrate on anything except survival. They're drawing pictures of tanks and dead bodies instead of flowers and rainbows. They're playing games about war and death instead of tag and hide and seek. The elderly are dying at accelerated rates, not just from violence but from the stress and medical neglect. Many senior citizens depend on medications they can't get, medical equipment that doesn't work without reliable electricity, social services that have collapsed. Mrs. Patterson told me yesterday that 3 of her elderly neighbors have died in the past week, not from bullets, but from heart attacks, strokes, and diabetic complications that could have been treated under normal circumstances. The infrastructure damage is becoming irreversible. The electrical grid has been targeted by both sides as a strategic asset. Power plants, transmission lines, and substations have been bombed, sabotaged, or seized so many times that engineers say it would take years to restore reliable service, even if the fighting stopped tomorrow. The water treatment facilities are operating at minimal capacity, with skeleton crews who risk their lives just to keep basic services running. The transportation network is completely broken. Interstate highways are blocked by military checkpoints or destroyed bridges. Railroad lines have been cut in dozens of places. The airport has been closed for 2 weeks after both sides started shooting at each other across the runways. Richmond is becoming isolated from the outside world, dependent entirely on whatever resources exist within the combat zone. But the most devastating infrastructure loss is the information network. Without phones, internet, or reliable media, people are making critical decisions based on rumors, fear, and propaganda. Families don't know if their relatives in other cities are alive or dead. Communities can't coordinate relief efforts or share resources. Medical professionals can't consult with specialists or access treatment protocols. The knowledge networks that modern society depends on have been severed. I picked up a transmission earlier from someone claiming to represent the International Red Cross. They said they were trying to negotiate humanitarian corridors to evacuate civilians and deliver medical supplies, but both military commands were refusing to guarantee safe passage. The message said the situation in Richmond was being classified as a humanitarian crisis comparable to active war zones in other countries. America has joined the list of places where international aid organizations have to negotiate with armed groups to help suffering civilians. The battery is down to 29% now. I need to start thinking about what happens when the power runs out completely. There are other broadcasting stations trying to maintain independent coverage, but they're being shut down or taken over by one side or the other. The major networks went silent days ago. Local stations are either broadcasting military propaganda or playing automated emergency messages that nobody updates anymore. This might be one of the last independent voices documenting what's happening in Richmond. If these broadcasts end, if I can't maintain power, or if I'm discovered by one of the military units, I want people to remember what we witnessed here. I want them to understand how quickly a stable, prosperous American city can descend into chaos when political disagreement becomes military conflict. This is Austin Crowley on 97.3 FM, day 21 of the American crisis. The sounds of war have started again outside my window. Artillery fire in the distance, small arms fire closer by, the mechanical noise of military vehicles moving through empty streets. These are the sounds of democracy dying, of a country eating itself alive, of everything we thought was permanent about America proving to be as fragile as everything else human beings create. If you're listening from somewhere that still has peace, still has functioning government, still has neighbors who disagree without killing each other, hold on to it with everything you have. Protect it from the fear and hatred that destroyed us. Learn from our failure. Don't let political differences become existential warfare. don't let democracy become another casualty of the very forces that are supposed to protect it.